Big feet splashing over the water lilies of northern billabongs in Australia. The feet have elongated phalanges or toe bones, and look at those toenails, they have never been trimmed. Kakadu, a national park wetlands in the Northern Territory, and a billabong just outside of Normanton in far north Queensland. From here and several other places in the north, we are going to look at the jacana, the comb-crested jacana of Australia's tropical north. Wetlands of the tropics are very important for bird life. They are a source of food, and this is the reason most birds come to a billabong or a lagoon. Egrets fish, but in their spare time they do courtship flights. Feeding patterns of all the birds about a lagoon varies considerably. Some feed from the bottom, but the jacana, he feeds off the top. Then, one of the most important things about water in the north is that during the dry season, birds come there to drink. Ecosystems about the wetland areas of the north is such that some animals like these spoonbills would not survive without them. The vegetational habitat around a billabong or lagoon is also very important. We just saw the spoonbills in the mud, but in the hot tropics they also need to get into a shady tree and roost. Many waders have long legs so they can adjust their vision for the refraction in the water to catch fish or invertebrates. And the avian species around a billabong have different feeding patterns. The black-necked stork chases fish, the spoonbill chases small invertebrates on the muddy floor. The jacana in flight, watch where it lands, on a lily pad. Lily pads and the shoreline is where we will find the jacana, for it is here that they feed. Here on the foreshore, the jacanas are feeding, going through the grass looking for small insects, and it may well be that they will here find a small frog. There are 6 jacanas here. Many waders feed on the grassy edges of billabongs and lakes, as these native hens are doing now, just like the jacanas. Jacanas are the most interesting of birds. Here 2 jacanas are about to cross paths. As one comes towards the other, so they diverge. Jacanas tolerate many other birds in the billabong, but when it comes to another jacana, unless it is the direct offspring, close proximity will not be tolerated. The wetlands of northern Australia are a beautiful area. In the mornings and evenings, flocks of magpie geese fly in and out from the lagoons. And here is a young magpie geese doing the bobbing, seeing if he can feed from the bottom of the lake. Some birds feed on the bottom and others from the top, and the jacana is a top feeder. This is a typical jacana walking at a fast pace over the lily pads, constantly pecking, getting insects and seeds. Seeds from the lilies that have fallen onto the lily pads. They occasionally have a preen and often will sit in the water for a moment as a caution to hide from raptors. I don't know how they scratch like that. They will often pick off Australian native bees because these don't move as fast as the European bee. I have never seen them eat a European honeybee. A jacana with clumsy big feet like this, how does it land? It flies at a good pace. Let's look at a freeze frame. At takeoff the toes collapse or flex. Then, on landing, the toes extend. And just before landing, the hind toe comes down like a keel, stabilising the foot. Then, as the foot lands, this slowing down effect of the hind toe stops the bird from skidding on the slippery lily pad. The feet of a jacana are what makes the jacana a particular family. There are approximately 6 genera within the family Jacanidae. The term jacana comes from Brazil, where the local indigenous people used it to name the South American jacana. The Australian jacana is a comb-crested jacana. It has a brilliant red comb. In the female, it may not be quite as brilliantly red, and in the juveniles, it may be very poorly developed. The comb of a jacana is a soft, fleshy material The red coloration is caused by the blood circulating through it. The comb develops with puberty just like an ordinary chook. With the jacana, both male and female have a similar comb, maybe a little bit pink in the female. Jacanas are tolerated by most birds around a billabong, and when the waters are high and the lilies are growing, there is plenty of food for the jacana. In addition, the feeding pattern of birds varies. This glossy ibis, for instance, you can see him going like a sewing machine, his bill going up and down, feeding on invertebrates at the bottom. The straw-necked ibis varies a little bit from the glossy, in that he is more inclined to probe deeper into the mud. Brolgles and sarus cranes are similar in that they go deep. Here is a young sarus crane. See the jacanas going around, feeding from the grassy area adjacent to the lake? And look at the adult sarus crane. He's found a lotus seed and given it to the young. The jacana is a small bird, even smaller than the little peewees or mudlarks, which are feeding in a very similar way, but the mudlark won't feed off a lily pad. This little jacana is going around quite happily amongst all the other birds that are feeding on the billabong edge. The waterfowl are also not really competing with the jacana. Some of the ducks dive, some of them eat from the surface. The pink-eared duck feeds from the surface, and if the environment is right, the male and the female pink-eared duck cooperatively swim in a circle, each stirring up the mud, bringing chironomids or bloodworms up to the surface where they can harvest them. When visiting the billabongs and wetland areas of northern Australia, one can only be impressed with the diversity of the waterfowl. They come in like clouds bringing rain. Shelducks in their hundreds flying into Mutton Hole Lagoon at Normanton. Grey teal taking off, and then green pygmy geese just cruising over the surface. But the little jacana has its niche environment, walking over the lily pads. No other birds are competing with the jacana for the lily pad surface. If the lily pad density is low, with wide spacings, the jacana will fly between them. With their long toes, they are also good swimmers, but generally fly. With the onset of the dry season, when the billabongs start to dry up, the jacana will fly on to the next lagoon or coastal wetlands. I suspect it is instinct that keeps the jacana from swimming from one lily pad to the next. For in these tropical lagoons of northern Australia, one is never certain as to what lies below the surface. You will notice that as we look at the jacana, most of the birds are solitary. If another bird comes, as we've noted, they will evade and move in another direction, but yet they do like to be within a social distance. Most of the filming that we do in the tropical north is done in the dry season for obvious reasons. Yet, the jacanas breed in the wet season. But if there has been a good year, the jacana will continue to breed. And look at this, just on the edge of the water, you can see day-old comb-crested jacana chicks running around, feeding themselves. All jacanas have what are called precocial chicks. Did you see the adult male? He called and the chick ran under his wing. Precocial chicks are born with down, and as soon as they're hatched, they can feed themselves. The role of a parent of a precocial chick is to lead it in the right direction to find food and protect from predation. Here is a frame sequence of a juvenile. The comb itself is very small, and the cap over the head is tan, not black like the adult. A little bit more about precocial chicks. Precocial chicks are born with downy feathers covering them, whereas an altricial chick, or one that is totally dependent, is usually born naked, without any feathers, maybe a few quills at the most. Birds having precocial chicks are largely waders and ducks. And within a few hours of coming out of the shell, these birds can see, feed, walk, and in the case of ducks, swim. In the far north of Australia, chicks have trouble surviving. Eggs are eaten. Water monitors can take eggs from a floating nest. Terns constantly fly over these billabongs and marshy areas looking for fish, but they are addicted to any egg that is left unprotected. Here is a gull-billed tern. Another flying white bird, a tern with a red bill, a Caspian tern. The bird on the right has a large bright red comb. In contrast to the bird on the left, the comb is more pink and smaller. The reason for this is that the bird on the left is immature. The black cap hasn't fully developed, and neither has the comb. It is smaller in size. The bird on the right is most likely the male, for it is the male that raises the young comb-crested cicanas. Getting a male and a female cicana together is near impossible for a videographer, unless it's at mating mode, which in Australia happens during the wet season. And the wet season is associated with heavy downpours, and access to the billabongs and wetlands of the north is limited. But what happens is that the male builds a little nest. It's a floating nest. The female will come along, inspect the nest, and if she's happy, do a little display. They will copulate, and then she will hang around that nest for a while, lay her eggs, and then she will depart, never to see the offspring, and leave the male to look after the chicks. This is called polyandrous behaviour, for as soon as she has laid the eggs there, she will then depart looking for another male who's building a nest and do exactly the same thing, leaving each male to incubate the eggs and raise the subsequent chicks. The most famous Australian bird that has similar polyandrous behaviour is the emu. And here is Old Man Emu as he guides the newly hatched precocial emu chicks. Sea eagles cruising over a coastal wetland at Normanton, and the jacana spending every day, all day, out on the lily pads, is exposed. Occasionally he will hop off the lily pad and dive into the water rather reluctantly, knowing aerial danger is present. There is competition for aerial space over these billabongs, and here you can see a harrier chasing away a sea eagle. A nest, a whistling kite with its young, right next to the lagoon. The chick has a voracious appetite, so the whistling kite is constantly searching for food. While the jacana chicks are out on the lily pads, they are vulnerable to attack by birds. So every now and again, the adult male will call them in for protection under the wing. Most important of all, he will keep an eye on the sky. With a raptor threat, the jacana will drop into the water, or if the male is looking after chicks, he will call them under the wing. But some other birds, like the dotterel, have different methods of protecting themselves from aerial attack. Here, a dotterel, with a nest or chicks nearby, poses as a bird with a broken wing, as a distraction from any aerial attack. Avian leg length around a billabong varies enormously. For instance, the ducks have got very short legs. Then the egrets, spoonbills, blackneck storks and brolga have long legs. And also the jacana. Not as long, but here's a relative small bird. But the long and short-legged birds differ from the jacana in that they are more gregarious. The jacana is much more of an isolationist. This jacana is doing the lonesome thing all by himself, wandering over the lily pads, pacing it out with rapid, quick movements of his feet. No other birds near him, or at least in close proximity. And this is typical of a jacana without children. With the wet season, the rains make the rivers overflow. This fills the billabongs and the adjacent wetlands of the rivers, and so the fish are brought back into the billabongs, and this brings back the birds, but it also brings back other creatures, and one in particular that's a threat to all birds is the crocodile. He likes barramundi, so he will move from the estuarine areas along the rivers into the coastal billabongs and wetlands. So any bird that lands in the sight of a crocodile is watched by those reptilian eyes. Here this unfortunate pelican was taken as his feet dangled in the water. If there is a group of jacanas grouped together, either on the lily pads or on the foreshore, it usually suggests that this is a fairly large family group, and occasionally they can have up to 6 chicks, and the father supervises and manages the chicks. But occasionally you can have multiple family groups coming together. As mentioned, the jacanas are far from gregarious. After the wet season, when insects are breeding and food is abundant, the jacanas are far more tolerant. But once resources become limited, when family groups come together, it can be a declaration of war. At the Cairns wetlands, this is exactly what is happening. It is at the end of the dry season. 2 family groups have crossed paths. With the dry, the insect breeding population has resulted in diminished amount of food for these birds. The young jacanas are now virtually independent, but the adult male is determined that his young ones are going to be the ones that survive. So with the limited amount of food resources available, the adult jacana goes to war with any other groups that impose on his territory. One of the males here nearly drowns the opposition leader of the family group. Some studies have suggested a minimal amount of jacana chicks survive, possibly only 10%. A long dry season where the food availability is reduced is one of the factors that contribute to it, but the other one is the nature of the jacana itself. These birds are highly aggressive, and if food is not available, they threaten one another. Moving west through the Northern Territory, we come to the Mary River, and here we find the lotus lily. One of the names for the comb-crested jacana commonly applied to it is the lotus bird. With the pink flowers and the red comb of the jacana, this combination is absolutely stunning. Sometimes the flowers will fade and fall over, dropping the seeds onto the lotus pads where the jacanas can feed on the seed. Another name for the jacana is the Jesus bird, and this comes from a New Testament story about Jesus. I don't doubt the validity of this story as it is documented by multiple authors. The story goes that the disciples went out fishing as a group in a boat. and the wind was against them, it says in the scripture. It became stormy and the waves increased in size. This didn't concern the experienced fishermen, but they looked out over the waves and saw Jesus walking on the water, and like all of us being sceptical of miracles, they couldn't believe their eyes. But then Jesus uttered those magic words recorded in the Gospels and said, "Do not be afraid." Matthew, the historian who worked for the taxation department, elaborates a little bit more on the story of Jesus in the storm. In his account, he recollects how all the disciples were sceptical, but the most sceptical of all was Peter, who couldn't believe that this was Jesus, but an apparition. And Peter called out to Jesus walking on the water and says, "If you aren't a ghost, call me out to walk on the water to you." Jesus waved for him to come, but as he stepped out of the boat, the wind increased and the waves got bigger, and Peter immediately doubted that he could do it, and suddenly began to sink, until he was grasped by the hand of Jesus and lifted up out of the water to walk with him back to the safety of the boat. And so the jacana is often called the Jesus bird, for if your eye gets down at the surface of the water and looks over it, looking at the birds walking, they appear to walk on water. For the lily pads at a horizontal level are no longer visible. The diet of a jacana is mostly invertebrate. You will notice they spend a lot of time looking under the edge of the lily pad, for it is here, on the undersurface edge, that the insects come in to lay their eggs. Here, jacana concentrate their efforts looking for the insect or the larval forms. As mentioned, on the surface of the lily, the seeds collect, and on these lotus pads, watch the little white seeds being picked up by the comb-crested jacana. And like many other waders, they will pick up decaying vegetation, shake it over a lily pad, looking for bloodworms or chironomids falling out. The other things that fall out are insect larvae, for they are also attracted to the decaying vegetation. As mentioned, the jacana will spend a lot of time going around the edge of a lagoon or billabong, looking amongst the grass, trying to find insects here. It's a little bit different than a lily pad, and the bonus is that occasionally they can find a small frog. I trust you have enjoyed this video, and if you would like to see more videos of Australian birds in the wild, using your Google account, just hit the subscribe button and you will get automatic notification of our next